Hello everyone. Today we will discuss about thalamus. The objectives are to learn about the diencephalon, its divisions, thalamus, structures and nuclei and its functions, the medial geniculate body, lateral geniculate body, the pineal gland, the habenular nucleus and the clinical aspects. The diencephalon is the middle structure which is largely embedded in the cerebrum. So, it is hidden from the surface view. Its cavity forms the greater part of the third ventricle. The hypothalamic sulcus extending from the interventricular foramen to the cerebral aqueduct divides each half of the diencephalon into the dorsal part and the ventral parts. So, we will see the further subdivisions. So, the diencephalon is divided into dorsal part and the ventral part by the hypothalamic sulcus. The dorsal part includes thalamus, which is often referred as a dorsal thalamus. The metathalamus includes the medial geniculate body and the lateral geniculate body. The epithalamus includes the pineal body and the habenula. The ventral part includes the hypothalamus and the subthalamus. So, subthalamus is also known as the ventral thalamus. So, today we will learn about the dorsal part of the diencephalon. So, the dorsal part, here you can see the thalamus and the epithalamus. The ventral part includes the subthalamus and the hypothalamus. So, now the thalamus. So, the thalamus is a large mass of grey matter. So, measured about 4 centimeter in each side, that is in the anteroposterior 4 centimeter, vertically 4 centimeter and transversely also the 4 centimeter. It has two poles, the anterior pole and the posterior pole or the posterior ends. The anterior pole is narrow and it is close to the midline. It forms the posterior boundary of interventricular foramen. See here the arrow is showing the interventricular foramen. So, the posterior boundary is formed by the anterior pole of the thalamus. The posterior end is expanded and is known as the pulvinar, and it is extend beyond the third ventricle. It overhangs the lateral and medial geniculate body and the superior colliculus with its brachium. So, here we can observe the anterior pole which is closer to the interventricular foramen and the posterior pole or the pulvinar end of the thalamus, it overhangs the superior colliculus. So, the surfaces, it is having 4 surfaces: superior surface, inferior surface, medial surface and the lateral surface. So, in another section we can make out the superior surface, inferior surface, medial surface and opposite to that is the lateral surface. The superior surface is also known as the stratum zonale. It forms the lateral ventricular part. It forms the floor of central part of lateral ventricle, and the medial extraventricular part that is covered by tela choroidea of third ventricle by free margin of the body of the fornix. So, in the superior surface we are having the lateral ventricular part and the medial extraventricular part. It is bounded laterally by the caudate nucleus, stria terminalis, the thalamostriate vein, medially bounded by the habenular stria. So, the inferior surface rests on the subthalamus and hypothalamus. So, here you can observe below the thalamus, that is the inferior surface, it is resting on the subthalamus and the hypothalamus. The medial surface, it forms the posterior-superior part of lateral wall of the third ventricle, and the two medial surfaces are connected through the interthalamic adhesions. The stria medullaris thalami or the fascicles of the nerve fibers, it courses along its dorsomedial margin. Here you can observe the stria medullaris thalami. The lateral surface is related to the internal capsule, that is, it forms the medial boundary of the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Relations. So, the thalamus here you can observe anteriorly it is related to interventricular foramen, the caudally to the midbrain, dorsally it is related to lateral ventricle, ventrally it is related to the subthalamus and hypothalamus, medially it is related to third ventricle, and laterally it is related to internal capsule. So, now structures and nuclei of thalamus. It is composed of the white matter and the grey matter. So, the grey matter is interrupted by two vertical sheets of white matter, that is the external medullary lamina and the internal medullary lamina. The external medullary lamina, you can observe on the lateral aspect, it covers the lateral surface, and the internal medullary lamina, it is Y-shaped band. So, here you can observe the Y-shaped band. It divides the thalamus into anterior, medial and the lateral nuclear group. So, here we can observe the anterior in the yellow color and medial the blue color, and lateral group is depicted in a pink color. So, the intramedullary lamina contains the fibers connecting the thalamic nuclei with one another. Then the neuronal colliculus, that is intralaminar nuclei, is present here. So, here you can see the internal medullary lamina. So, anatomical division. In the anterior division we are having anterior nucleus. Medial division, it is having dorsomedial nucleus, and the lateral division is again subdivided into dorsal tire and the ventral tire. The ventral tire includes the ventral anterior group of nucleus, the ventral lateral group and the ventral posterior group. The ventral posterior group is again divided into the ventral posterolateral and the ventral posteromedial group. So, here you can see the ventral divisions which is having the different groups of the nuclei. Then the dorsal tire includes the lateral dorsal nucleus and the lateral posterior nucleus. So, the intralaminar nuclei, it includes the centromedian nucleus and the midline nuclei, and there will be a reticular nucleus also present. So, further we can observe again the anatomical divisions. This is here we can see the anterior nuclei, the intramedullary lamina which is Y-shaped, then the medial nuclei that is represented in a blue color, and the lateral nuclei that is represented by the red nuclei. So, here you can observe the ventral tire and the dorsal tire, the pulvinar end, that is the posterior end, which overhangs the geniculate body, that is medial and lateral geniculate bodies. The functions of the thalamus: it is the relay station for processing of sensory input, somatic, auditory, visual and visceral, except the olfactory. They are all sensory input synapses in the thalamus on its way to the cortex. It plays a role in sleep-awake cycle, and thalamus is capable of awareness of sensation, example the pain, but lacks the sense of localization or intensity. It plays a role in motor control by reinforcing voluntary motor behavior initiated by the cortex. The clinical anatomy: thalamus is important relay and integrative center. So, the lesions will have a profound effects. There are three different etiologies which are more common causes, that is invasion of neoplasm, degeneration following disease, its arterial supply, and damage by hemorrhage. Thalamic syndrome, it is due to vascular impairment. There will be disturbance of sensation, hemiplegia, hemiparesis with a hyperasthesia and severe spontaneous pain, exaggerated feelings, and chorioathetosis. If there is a damage to the medial nucleus of thalamus, there will be decrease in the tension, aggression and anxiety, and there will be it increases the forgetfulness. So now the metathalamus, it includes lateral geniculate body and medial geniculate body that are present on either side of the midbrain below the thalamus. Medial geniculate body, it is oval elevation situated below the pulvinar of the thalamus and lateral to the superior colliculus. The inferior brachium connects it to the inferior colliculus. The functions of medial geniculate body, it is a relay station on the pathway of auditory impulses to the cerebral cortex. The perception of painful and nociceptive stimuli. The afferents is lateral lemniscus, inferior colliculi, the ascending reticular pathway. The efferents to the acoustic radiation to auditory area of the cortex and to the secondary somatosensory area. Lateral geniculate body, it is a small oval elevation situated anterolateral to the medial geniculate body below the thalamus. It is overlapped by the medial part of the temporal lobe and it is connected to the superior colliculus by superior brachium. The structure, it is having 6 layers, that is 1 to 6. The layers 1, 4 and 6, which are pink in color, they receives the contralateral optic fibers, and the layers 2, 3 and 5, which is depicted in a blue color, it receives the ipsilateral optic fibers, that is on the same side fibers. The afferents is to the optic tract, and the efferents, it gives rise to optic radiations going to the visual area of the cortex. The functions of the lateral geniculate body, it is the last relay station on the visual pathway to the occipital cortex. Now the epithalamus, it occupies the caudal part of the roof of the diencephalon. It includes right and left habenular nuclei, the pineal body or the epiphysis cerebri, and the habenular commissure and the posterior commissure. The habenular nucleus, it lies below the floor of the habenular trigone. The functions of this is, it acts as a nodal point for the convergence of the basic emotional drives. The pineal gland, it is a small conical organ projecting backwards and downwards between the superior colliculi below the corpus callosum. It is separated by the tela choroidea of the third ventricle. The functions of pineal gland, it is the endocrine gland, which is having a regulatory influence on other endocrine organs, and it synthesizes and discharges the melatonin. The questions for assignment: describe thalamus and its connections, medial geniculate body, lateral geniculate body, pineal gland, habenular nucleus. Thank you.